The amount of camera gear you own doesn't really have much bearing on how good of a photographer you are. We should always all remember that we're not trying to impress other photographers with how much camera gear we have. We're just trying to create good photos. So if I look back over my photography career in portrait photography, I could pretty much narrow down to 2 types of lenses that I've shot most of my work on. And in fact, if I just used these 2 lenses, I could probably shoot about 85% of everything that I've ever shot. So in this video, I'm going to teach you how to set up a 2-lens portrait photography kit for yourself. That will be more than you would actually ever need as a portrait photographer. And we're going to do this regardless of whatever system it is that you shoot, because none of that stuff matters. So let's get into it. Now, if you like the way the images look in this video, please check out my online editing workshops. You can watch them as many times as you want, and I will teach you how I edit my portraits from start to finish. There are no hidden secrets in the world of editing. There are only the tools that are available. But understanding how to use them properly and having a really good grasp of what's possible to do with them and why you're using them is absolutely critical to editing your work well. So if you like the look of my work, check out my online editing workshops. The links are in the description down below. Now, you could do portrait photography with just 1 lens, but I'm going to give you 2 because I think the 2 gives you more variety and a bit more flexibility. The first lens I think you should have is a mid-range zoom. It really doesn't matter if it's an f4 or an f2.8. I'll cover them in a minute, which one I think you should get depending on what you want to do. What I really love about using a mid-range zoom is that in a studio, I can stay fixed in one spot. That means my perspective doesn't change much. For our perspective to change when we're doing photography, either our subject or us, we have to move. We have to change the distance between us. Usually when I'm photographing my subject, they're fairly static. I mean, they're moving on the spot, but they're not moving backwards and forwards much. If I stay pretty much static as well, and they're turning and changing their poses and doing different things, I'm going to achieve a similar perspective all the time by staying more fixed in one spot. In a studio, 24-105 f4 is probably the best type of lens to use. They're generally not the sharpest, and I don't care about that. All of the lenses that have been made, there are very few. I'd have to think really hard to try and find lenses that aren't sharp enough for portrait photography. So please don't worry about the sharpness when you're looking at lenses. It's just, this isn't relevant. The choice between something that's like a 24-70 and a 24-105 comes more down to, or some sort of equivalent. Are you going to use that lens outdoors in lower lighting conditions sometimes? For me, that was always a yes. So I went with the 24-70 2.8. Most of my work that you see is shot on the Canon Mark I version. It's a great portrait lens because it's not particularly sharp, but it has a very nice rendering and look to it. But even when it comes to working on location, I think f2.8 is great outdoors, and f2.8 to me on full frame is a really perfect aperture for portrait photography in general. It just gives you that correct amount of depth of field. It doesn't blur out the background so much that you don't know where you are if you're using it outdoors, and also keep your shutter speeds a little bit higher. One of the things I like to do on location is keep the shutter speeds quite high. It's one of the key things I think that people get wrong quite often. So if I could only have 1 lens, it would probably be a 24-70. Now let me know in the comments down below so other people can read it as well, because other people like reading this stuff. What is your number 1 go-to portrait photography lens? And let people know, is that for studio work or is it for outdoors? Because there's obviously always a big difference between the 2. The second lens that I would add on would be a prime lens, but based on how you shoot and your kind of vision, that will change the type of prime lens that you go for. So the reason for adding on a prime lens to that zoom, which you don't actually have to do, but I like with a prime lens, especially when you're doing things outdoors, is that it gives you consistency. You'll often find that you'll stick to the same distance to your subject. Let's say that your style is to do upper half, which is what I do. Then you're going to stay within that range and keep it consistent. When you're moving around outdoors, because you're moving a lot, your model's moving a lot, it's very tempting to zoom a lot as well. And then it starts to become a bit of a sort of an uncoordinated mess. Whereas that in the studio, having that zoom ability, because you're both fairly static, was useful because it maintained your perspective. What I find is that outdoors, that kind of gets flipped around the other way. So what you'll see is that 35, 50 and 85 millimeters, which I guess are the most common outdoor portrait focal lengths. There's obviously others, but let's stick with those for now. They tend to have a look about them. So 35 millimeters is going to bring in a lot more of the environment into the picture. With 35 millimeters, you need to be very careful about your angles that you're shooting at. I have a video on that, but you can use this to your advantage as well. It's just, you need to do it deliberately. So like this picture here, you can see this comparison. from shooting from a low, medium and high angle, how much that changes how we see our subject. As we move up the focal lengths to 50 and 85, this diminishes. You'd have to push the camera angle further in order to achieve those kinds of looks. So let's jump to 85 and then we'll cover 50, because 50 is best and worst of both worlds. 85 is going to give you a very much more polished kind of look. A lot of the time you're going to find you'll be cropping out more of the background, but because of that compression, it's going to make the background look bigger and closer to your subject. So it's going to look like you have this larger background. And the way that it flattens out perspective, because we're a little bit further back, is that it gives a more professional and polished kind of look to the images. In some ways it's easier to work with because it's going to force you to maintain that distance. The other side of it is that a lot of people just end up getting headshots all the time. And that's not really what the 85 is about. I mean, it's good at doing that, don't get me wrong. That's one of its actual primary uses. But if you just do that with it, then you're missing out. I have another whole video of that as well. I'll leave links to those videos in the description. Check them out afterwards. But the 85, you need to think about what's in your background. Because your background's getting blown up and stretched a lot, it's very easy to just have nothing backgrounds that don't add anything to the picture. But if you plan and look at your environment a bit better, you can have backgrounds that add context and make the pictures actually look really nice. Now, when it comes to 50 millimeters, some people say it's a boring focal length because for them, they're getting the worst of both worlds of the 35 and the 85. But for some people, it gets the best of them. I think that looks the best when it's done well, but it's the easiest to make look bad. If you're starting, it's the focal length I would push you to, because it will teach you the most about composition, because you'll have to use the things that make 35 look good, and you'll have to use the things that make 85 look good. About 50 millimeters, these are all just focal lengths, but it's the distance that it forces you to be from your subject to frame up. You're including more of the background like a 35 does. So you're going to have to be really aware of what you're putting into the frame and be deliberate about it. You're also at 50 millimeters getting this height variation that matters, but it's less dramatic than at 35. So you have to be more deliberate about it. Otherwise it can just look off. Again, video about that in the description down below, how to do it. And like 85, you can easily end up just losing backgrounds and just having some backgrounds that are nothing, just brick walls and things. I think that's why 50 is really good additional lens for people to have to the mid-range zoom. It will teach you the most about composition if you aren't lazy with it. If you are lazy with it and you just go, oh, I can't bothered, you'll just label it as boring and walk away from it. Don't do that. Stick with it and learn how to use it, and it will reward you a lot. Then when you go and buy a 35 and an 85, you'll be like, this is easy. I can just do this all day long. And you may then ditch the 50 and just want to use the 35 and 85. And you may say, why not just jump to those straight away? Because I tell you this, all the photographers that I know that started on 50 and learned well with it went on to become, I think, better at composition. I can't prove this to you, but that's just my experience, like anecdotal evidence. It just seems to work out better for people. And I think it works out better for me as well. It makes you so deliberate about your compositions through restrictions. This is something we should talk about briefly, is that when you have restrictions, when you make things a little bit harder for yourself, you become a better photographer, as long as you don't get frustrated with it. And then, you know, this is my gripe. When someone tells you 50 millimeters is boring, they're blaming the tools. You know that saying about blaming the tools? If you can't do good work with a 50, it's you, it's not the lens. So buckle up and learn to take photos properly. And if you put that effort in, you will be rewarded with it massively. And you only need to get a 51.8, or if you're on a crop sensor, get something like a 30, or, you know, the Sigma do 30s, don't they? 31.4s, or get a 35 millimeter. That will get you closer, get roughly in there. And I think on Micro Four Thirds, you're going to be at about a 24 millimeter, 25, something like that. So, because it's 2x, isn't it? So you need to think about something in that kind of range that will teach you an awful lot, and you'll get better at composition by doing that. You could go and make your entire career on that. But the takeaway I want you to have from this video is that you don't need to spend lots of money on camera gear. You don't need to look at other photographers and be frustrated at the camera gear they've got. Judge people by their work and their results. And you'll often find that even the good photographers that have loads of gear are mostly using just a couple of lenses. even though they own all that other stuff, because sometimes, especially for professionals, there's times when I need that sometimes. So what you'll find, if you stick to a 2-lens setup like this, you'll actually start to create a look, because you're not using everything, you're using a limited scope. It's like niching, because you're doing it with focal length and you're not creating all of the variety, which is one of the arguments people say. You need to have all of the different lenses, you can get all of the different variety. That might be true at a wedding, for example, but it's not true for portrait photography. With portrait photography, we want to define a look and a style. Using a limited focal range will give you that. Focus more on lighting and editing and composition than you do on having lots and lots of camera gear. And remember that credibility comes from your work, not what's in the camera bag. That's really important to remember, because anytime someone's got tons of gear and they're trying to tell you what to do or give you their opinion, always ask to see their portfolio first. Always, always ask. Mine's on my website and my Instagram. You can go and check it out. Remember at the beginning, I told you about my editing workshops. Editing is a really big part, especially in portrait photography, because we have to put our final stamp on the picture. It's no good just having what the camera gives you and saying, yes, the engineer that made this knew exactly what they were doing. Let's go with that. No, you need to have more of an artistic mindset than that. This is a creative thing where we're trying to create a mood and an atmosphere. That comes from lighting, styling, background selection, lens choice, and editing, because it gives us our final look. Links are in the description down below. I'll see you guys again in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.